I know you guys too much. Oh, he's not gonna waffle on for 2 hours if it's a 9-minute video. Watch me. Gameplay options, Lazarla. Don't worry, we can always watch your videos tomorrow if you throw them in the Discord. Since we'll be playing more PoE tomorrow. Tim Cain gameplay options. Let's go.
Hi everyone, it's me, Tim.
Hi Tim.
Today I want to talk about gameplay options. Now, a few months ago, I did a video on game difficulty settings and talked about the pros and cons of different difficulty settings you should put in a game. But in the comment section, a bigger discussion happened about just gameplay options in general, way more than just difficulty settings.
Gameplay options. Okay, so he's gonna probably talk about gameplay options instead of difficulty settings. I'm curious what he draws the line on here. For me, I would say that in most cases, in almost every case, adding gameplay options to your game, like difficulty settings, let's say, is up to the developer. If the developer wants to include them, fine. If the developer doesn't, fine. And adding them, I don't think makes the game worse for players. It just gives more players an option to play the way they want to play, right? So if Miyazaki with Elden Ring 2 Electric Boogaloo wanted to add difficulty options to the game, which would be very controversial, I think that they have the right to do so. And it gives the players the option to do so. But I think that there are design reasons why he shouldn't do that. Either way, I think this is really just up to the developers, and it depends on the gameplay and the genre. Some genres are better for this, some markets are better for this, right? A casual market is probably more interested in gameplay difficulty options than a hardcore market, where especially you have a sort of social, what's the word? Like, a social status gained from beating the game. Like Elden Ring, like Dark Souls. Just give players an option.
And one of the things that came up was
Yeah.
people talking about games that have a lot of gameplay settings, gameplay options. Now, there are people who like them,
Yes.
and they like them for the obvious reasons of, I like to be able to customize the game exactly how I want to play it, which I get. And I probably fall in that category a lot more than the people who do not like having lots of gameplay
I agree.
options. But I actually talked to a few people in the comment section, took some notes, have been ruminating on it for a while, decided to do a video on it to give people, to basically, if you want to keep talking about it, here's a video to focus on it. But also I want to talk about the three big arguments on why people do not like having lots of customizable gameplay options. I wouldn't say these are the only three, but these are the frequent three. So I'll try to summarize them here. And by the way, just to make it
Before he gets into that,
completely and utterly
Okay, hold on.
clear, I'm not talking about accessibility options.
okay, yeah. That differentiation is important. So, yep, a social status BS can fuck right off, especially for a single player game. I don't agree. I think some people may not care, but the reality is that there is a social status to beating certain games that are considered difficult. It is a real thing. I mean, that is part of the game's design, right? That is part of the intention, is that we make hard experience, you beat the game on that hard experience. Is no option to make the game easy, like Super Meat Boy. That is the entire point of the game, is that it is difficult and it is challenging and requires skill to beat. There should not be a social status. Well, I mean, that's just the way the game is designed, right? That is part of the experience. That is maybe even a pillar of the game, is the difficulty or the challenge that you want to say. And I'm not saying that there can't be options in those games, but that players will inevitably take games like that are difficult, and they will create social statuses whether or not you like it as a designer or a developer. If your game has challenge to it or a way to make the game harder, there will be emergent social status applied to beating the game on that difficulty or on that highest difficulty. Bad design is, yeah, but how do you define bad design for me? Because simply put, if I put a hard difficulty in the game, there will be people that come out and compare themselves to how well or quickly they can beat a game on the hardest difficulty, whether or not I want it. Some people want to do that, so not on the developer. Yeah, but that's But that social status can be built into the game. Having jumps that are too long to actually do as an example. What do you mean? How do you plan to implement difficulty in CC? Gameplay options. Just with either, accessibility of ingredients or something, or how long they take to grow back. There isn't a whole lot of option here, but there are ways that I can just make it a little bit easier for the player. Lengthening days if we have a day-night cycle. Shit like that. We can do it. Time between NPCs to show up. The characters talk really fast on hard. I like it. Timer to reply. No, we won't be doing that. No timers for replying. It's funny though. I like that idea. Good scrub as a pillar. The thing is, like, the way that From Software has designed their games, it is a social status to beat the game. That you've beaten Elden Ring. And unfortunately, with that, there are people that take it a step further. I've beaten the game without using ashes. I've beaten the game without leveling up. I've beaten the game using a dance pad. I mean, that's more of like a niche subgenre to that challenge, but either way, it exists because the game is considered challenging. The developer wants to put it on themselves. It could communicate well or could miscommunicate for better or worse in either case. Yeah. Way From Software designs their games could get fucked. I think From Software designs their games extremely well. They are entirely skill based. Like, you can beat the game on the easiest without leveling up, without getting any weapons, as long as you're good at dodging. QTE talk system. It is good. So it's like, whether you like it or not, I mean, I worked on Darkest Dungeon. I made a mod that made the game more challenging, and it was considered a status to beat the game with that mod. It's as simple as that. Like, there was nothing in the game to track that or whatever. It was just, it emerges because of the way that the game is designed. QTEs are super terrible design. Sometimes. Sometimes they are, sometimes they aren't.
There are other things like color blindness.
QTEs are pressing buttons at a certain time. You could argue that every single fight in Elden Ring is a QTE, because you have to press buttons in a certain order at certain times. So it's like, QTEs are just, I think, they're almost like the term grind. Like, grind is a negative connotation for the term gameplay loop. If the gameplay loop is boring and repetitive and has to be done a lot in very short sequences and bursts, or certain parts of that loop have to be done over and over and over again, it's considered grinding. People are saying that this thing, usually the term grind is used to say, this thing that I have to do repetitively, the loop, is boring. That's just the incentive behind speedrunning. Which one? Raptor social engineering people? Yeah. Game design there is kind of some social engineering to it. From Software's hard jumps are often inconsistent based on dev environment being different from the product, and then different again during remakes. Which hard jumps? I mean, like, it may be in Elden Ring, which jumps are hard. What do you mean by that? Maybe I'm not understanding that well enough. But QTEs are just a bad way to refer to gameplay actions done in a specific order in a way that isn't that interesting. They could be replaced by something that masks the exact same required actions by the player in a way that isn't as in your face about it. You can disagree all you want with that, but that is just simply the case. An Elden Ring fight is a QTE. I'm not saying MGS Revengeance is a good QTE. I'm just saying that these are the same thing on a core input level. Player presses certain actions at certain times to avoid failure. Hot takes only. I'm just saying that they hide it in games like Elden Ring because you're doing combat. It's part of something bigger, and there's some RNG and different elements to it. Instead for personal achievement, isn't social status a big motivation for speedrunning? Yes. Yes, it is. It is, yeah, it is. It's social status. It's entirely it. I mean, you can like doing speedrunning, but it is social status. There's an entire, that's why speedruns have a leaderboard for people to compare for people to beat other speedrunners. So whether you like it or not, social status is one of the reasons why a lot of game design decisions are made. It's one of the reasons why you have, especially multiplayer games, are designed the way that they are nowadays, is for social status. Like that is a emotion on the emotional wheel, being better than other people, especially for men. The male audience loves that. That's how it is. QTEs are completely worthless. They shatter the immersion of the game. When I'm playing the game and I want to jump, I thought I need to press X. It is jump. Well, that's what it is. That's why QTEs, in the way that you're describing them, are the easiest way to do them, where like a cutscene is playing and you press this to avoid failure. But guess what? When the cutscene isn't playing and you're doing battle, if you don't press dodge, you die. So press button at this point to avoid failure. But it's masked, it's hidden behind gameplay, and it feels a bit more natural. You're not thinking, oh, I'm doing QTEs, you're thinking, oh, I'm engaging in the combat. So it's the same thing from an input perspective, it's just you're hiding it. It's the same way that you can mask progression, you can mask the player facing challenges or going into a difficult area, because you're not doing QTEs. Quick time events. If I am not quick enough to time the event of rolling out of the way of Radahn, he will kill me. It is not 100,000% different. It is the same action, just being done in a different way, and you have more freedom. Where you think you have more freedom. Is every game an RPG because you're playing a role? Define an RPG for me. Define what an RPG means and what it needs to be considered an RPG. And define how a QTE during a cutscene is significantly, as you said, 100,000% different from pressing a button to avoid an attack. But the QTEs in The Last Guardian, those don't have any prompts, and you use the same buttons as normal. They're masked more well. Better. More well. I love words. Game design students love discussing how poor of a title they think role-playing game is. It's muddied. It's muddied, but it's the same thing. Like QTEs, like yeah, in The Last Guardian, it's just masked. It doesn't feel like that's what it is, but that's what it is. QTEs are completely unconnected from the actual gameplay. You could argue that they are the gameplay. Like, that is the gameplay. What do you want the gameplay to be? Because that is the gameplay. You're saying they're unconnected from the actual gameplay, but define what the actual gameplay is. Because if the designers designed the game so that cutscenes with prompts are part of the gameplay, then that is the actual gameplay. Telltale games had a lot of QTEs in between dialogue, and that's how they did their gameplay. Since most of the gameplay in Telltale games were QTEs, you could argue that that is the actual gameplay. It may not be the gameplay that you like, but it's certainly the gameplay that a lot of people like, because I'll tell you what, if I look up Telltale's Walking Dead, there's no doubt about it, people like this game. I think when you think of QTE, you have to think about what is the player actually doing in that moment. And the player is watching something occur and reacting to it by pressing a button to perform an action. If they perform the action on time, they succeed. If they fail the action, they usually they die or something bad happens. That is no different in terms of action as a fight in Elden Ring where an enemy is about to attack and kill you, and you press a button to dodge. The difference is that you have more options available to you in the combat. Usually, you have an option to block. You have an option to tank the hit. You have an option to hit back. You know, you have other options in there, and a QTE is you have only this one option. And you could say that the limitation of options is what makes it unenjoyable for you, and I think that's fair, right? But that you still have options. This is limiting, more than this one, but they are the same thing in essence. It's not totally different. You need to, I feel like wait. If you need to jump into QTE and the button prompt is L2, but in normal gameplay, the button, yeah, but that's a completely different thing. That is a 100% different thing than what we're talking about. Heavy Rain, the whole game is QTE, yes. But Heavy Rain is still enjoyable to some extent. It's totally different. The fight in Elden Ring is systematized in the cutscene. It's just a cutscene. Well, the cutscene is the system. That is the system. The QTEs are the system. I think this is the main point. A QTE takes away control and that then gives it back arbitrarily, surprising times. Sure, but if players understand that and are okay with it, then people seem to understand and like QTEs. Like Walking Dead, right? So clearly, QTEs are not the bad thing here. There's something else in regards to QTEs that people think about that makes them unenjoyable in certain cases. In Walking Dead, the whole system is QTE. It's when you use it as a supporting mechanic. Yes, but that's the thing is like saying that it takes away from the gameplay. What about if it is the gameplay? Like here, I think you have, as Lee, you have an option to kick this zombie in the head, and if you don't do it, you die, right? It's a QTE. That's the gameplay. It doesn't take away from the gameplay. It is the gameplay. I can agree that as a distraction, maybe it feels poorly paced, but then it's not QTEs that are the problem. It is QTEs in this scenario. And we've talked about that before. There's no mechanic that I would say is bad in terms of game design. There's just mechanics that are put in bad places, used in bad ways, in bad amounts, that are paced poorly, right? If you go from Doom-like action scene where you're shooting things with a shotgun to now QTE cutscene, it just feels out of place, right? And it takes away from the freedom of movement and platforming that you had in the previous section. So it's not that the QTE is the problem, it's that the QTE in this scenario is the problem. Yeah, and I think really, like you said, it boils down to proper usage and consistent usage of mechanics. Not cargo culting stuff in. Yeah, I think that there are times that QTEs work well, but it's not every situation. I guess a lot of people just really, really don't use QTEs in a good way because a lot of them, they're a huge barrier for me. It's an easy solution to like a boss battle, right? Instead of having an interesting stage to the boss fight, throw in a QTE and now you don't have to do shit. I can agree with that. Are we here just to argue? Yes. But it is a conference. It's a game design debate, and we're talking about game design and development here with gameplay options. So I think QTEs are a great example of how a mechanic that is often universally hated can be used to great effect for different audiences. Like, an audience too is a big factor here. If you played Resident Evil 4, you would know that there are QTEs with like Wesker, right? And the game itself is not a QTE game. Resident Evil is not a QTE game. So it just feels out of place. But for people going into Walking Dead or playing, like, hey, this is my Telltale game, probably the original Resident Evil 4. I don't know if the new one did it better. But either way, if you go into like a Telltale game and you play it, you're expecting that there are going to be QTEs because you can see them. They're probably part of the trailers, hopefully, maybe. Basically, the ending fights of the Dying Light games. Yeah, exactly, Bebop. Also, welcome. It feels out of place, and if it feels out of place for the target audience, that's where people are like, well, the QTEs in this game suck. Well, why don't they suck in this game? If QTEs suck, why don't they suck in this game? And it's just because of expectations and what the gameplay is revolving around. When the core pillars of this game are the QTEs, they do find some interesting and innovative ways to handle it. But when it's just... I can even pull it up. RE4 Wesker fight. It is with Wesker, right? Or is that Resident Evil 5? Maybe it was Resident Evil 5, I'm sorry if I got that wrong. There's QTEs. Maybe it wasn't this one. There was some Resident Evil 4 or 5 fight. I don't know. Somebody can pull it up. Also, in Telltale game, there are only a few buttons that the QTEs use. Yeah, but saying that QTEs are bad and saying that QTEs which use different different shortcuts than what that action would be in the main game, those are two very different things. Try looking at Resident Evil 4 knife fight. Yeah, we're both thinking about the same thing, but I don't remember who it was with. Oh yeah, it was Krauser. That was his name. It was fucking Krauser. And like this whole fight, or a good portion of this fight, is
What they told you, John.
yeah. It's just this is what it is.
That's all. Leave Ashley out of this.
And it just feels so weird when none of the rest of the game was like this.
I'm American.
You are American. Oh my god. It's weird. It feels out of place. And that's why it's like you could say the QTEs in this game are bad, but I think QTEs are not the evil thing, it's the usage of them. And it would be the same thing, for instance, if I threw, I don't know, if I had Cauldron Chronicles, you know, our alchemy game, where we just had you just were able to pull out a sword and fight things with a sword and shield, it would feel out of place. It wouldn't feel like it makes sense for your character to just know how to use a sword and shield when all you've known is alchemy. It's just things that are out of place just won't feel good in that. Even though, of course, fighting with sword and shield in a lot of games feels great. The fucking stops for the inputs to process, it's very janky, yeah. Making a player press a different button for the same action as bad game design, however, can be done well, such as Last Guardian doesn't even feel like a QTE there. Just like a normal gameplay mechanic. Yeah, exactly. I agree. Okay, let's get back to gameplay options because we're waffling on.
And subtitles and font sizes and input customization and gamma correction.
So yeah, okay, so he's going to be talking about like gameplay options, not accessibility. That's not what this is about, so just so we all know what we're talking about here.
These are things that people need either to be able to play the game at all because maybe they're hard of hearing or have bad vision, but some people need them because of how they play. You may be playing the game on a computer monitor, 2 feet from your face. You may be playing it on a
and
TV
increase like the UI size, right?
That's 20 feet away from your face. Those probably need different options to make that game playable for you.
Yep.
What I'm talking about here are options that literally change how the game plays. So I'm talking about gameplay options. So the first argument I've heard about these gameplay options and reasons not to have them is a really strong one to argue against, and that is all those options have to be tested. And all the resulting combinations of those options have to be confirmed that the game is still viable.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point. I can say as an example, we had a lot of gameplay options in that train game that I made, a lot of them, and the player could customize very specifically how much grind they wanted. If they wanted to increase or decrease the grind because that was more fun for them, they could do that, right? And we still had a default options for them that I designed myself, but we did have to test that, does this work? Can the player still complete achievements and do certain things with these options enabled? And if it invalidates an achievement, or should it invalidate an achievement? Like, right, if the player turns in infinite money, should we not allow the player to unlock this achievement because of it? And then we need to communicate that. He's right. I think that is a good a development-focused reason why having gameplay options is not the greatest, but of course they have to be tested. They don't have to be tested if you want to be lazy, right? You don't have to test anything if you're okay releasing a broken mess. And sadly, we do see that. But he's right. If you want to have those, you should test them realistically.
And they're all when that combination is used, and by viable I mean that all the different builds that you're playing can still make it to the end of the game.
Yep. Maybe
one of
not
the
as fun.
examples that came up in comments was quest markers. If your game has an option, a gameplay option to turn on and off quest markers,
Then your game needs to. I mean, well, you'd say you're joking, but sadly, a lot of games do come out like that. But he's right. If you like to turn, if you can turn off quest markers, is the game actually playable without quest markers? Will you obtain enough information either through a journal or through character dialogue that makes the game playable with quest markers? Like, that is a reality.
well, a lot of people were like, well, that's a standard. But many people very wisely pointed out that if your narrative designers or level designers assumed that quest markers would be available, the NPC may not have given the player enough information to find the place they're supposed to go. If they're supposed to go find a cave, did they describe where the cave was on
Yeah,
the
is it just like, hey, can you go to, I lost my pocket watch in a cave. Can you go find it? And that's all that said. But then on the HUD, it would say, find the missing pocket watch in Forlorn Cave. And if the player turns that off, it's like, well, now where the fuck do I go?
map? Did they describe what it looked like? Did they describe, what was maybe around it? Like, oh, this cave is located on the south face of the pointy mountain, the mountain that looks like a cone, or it's on the only mountain that's a volcano or whatever. Give you some idea of how to get there. If they don't say that, if they just go, oh yeah, Bob stole that and he's hiding out in Shadow Cave. If that's all they say, you probably need a quest marker.
Yep.
And the point that people are trying to make there is, if your designers are designing for a certain combination of gameplay options, well, then you kind of need them, and they can't be options anymore. Another example of that came up with difficulty settings, which applies to gameplay settings as well, is you better test every single player build on every combination of those options. Congratulations, your test plan just got geometrically, if not exponentially, bigger. And
there are ways that I think people who are good at balancing can modify. Like, let's say that the game is more casual focused, right? So the game isn't particularly difficult. If increasing a gameplay option makes the game a little bit more difficult, even though the game itself is still very casual friendly and still easy, I think most designers would be like, well, yeah, it makes the game a bit more difficult, but the game is already pretty easy, so we don't really need to test if the player can beat it with that setting turned on, because they will. We know it'll be a bit more challenging, right? So I guess it depends on the game. It really depends on how much room the player has for error with the choices that they make. And that was one of the things that, like, with Darkest Dungeon, when we were developing it, that was always a top focus of, can the player beat this with a kind of suboptimal party, and do we want the player to be able to beat it with suboptimal party? And when designing my overhaul mod on the side for that was also a challenge, which was, I want this game to be more challenging but not more difficult, so the player will have to think more, but that the game itself, if the player thinks more, is about as easy as if they were playing the vanilla game. And that was kind of my goal with it, was that this is as easy as the vanilla game if you are good at thinking things through. If you don't complete the objective in 10 seconds, your character becomes depressed and goes home, where his daughter is wearing a t-shirt with the directions printed on her t-shirt. I like that.
Because it's a test plan that you're going to be paying to have tested, the time and money you spend on it just got geometrically or exponentially bigger.
Yeah, and think about it with like Holden Chronicles, with all the different outcomes for characters. It's got to be tested. It's all got to be tested. And it took us a long time to test it, and there might even still be bugs that are present in the build right now. But, we've learned now just how much time it's going to take to write one character and how much time it might take to test one character. Like, the Darkest Dungeon team kept asking themselves, can we make it harder, and never asked, is this worth the effort? The thing was, you would think that, but for a good portion of the development, especially while I was working there, was actually making the game easier. Like, I can tell you very specific, I don't think they'll be mad at me for mentioning that, but Tyler Sigmund, the co-creator, and who was kind of in charge of me, was always helping me, remind me, like, hey, when you're balancing this, remember what kind of market is working on this, and let's make this a bit easier because people have been complaining about this. And I think that within the 2 years that I worked there, the game became easier rather than harder, for sure. And I worked on it from around the Abomination patch past release, and for sure the game, in my opinion, became easier with all the stuff that we did.
Congratulations. Also, bear in mind, and this is the most annoying part about you spending a lot of time in those test plans and doing the testing, is you might spend 50% of your testing time and budget on game option combinations that end up being used by maybe less than 2% of your player base. Which, by the way, is another reason I think, I love metrics. But
metrics are a designer's best friend. I love metrics. I love sifting through player data and seeing what players are doing, what they're, if they're cheesing something, and how we can, if they're cheesing it because it's fun, let's find a way to retune it without destroying the fun, or tune things up that aren't as fun so that there are multiple viable ways to have fun, right? Because if you destroy something that people are using because they find it enjoyable, then you're ruining their fun. And you shouldn't try to do that, although there may be times where you can't always avoid it, or you can't always avoid it in a perfect way. Hearing the corpse thing was super controversial. It was, but that was just made sense to me. Yeah, because it was abused and made the game easier, but arguably it didn't meet the goal of making the game tactical. And so what they smartly did, very intelligently did, was they're like, okay, the reason people are doing this is because ranged units suck and melee characters are too overpowered because there aren't any corpses. So by adding corpses, it balances out melee characters and makes ranged characters a bit better. So it was tough love. It was a tough decision, but it made the game much better. I don't know why it was so controversial when it was a very clearly better design decision that brought more light to melee, or to ranged units. Sorry. How do you get that data? I mostly just watch people playtest videos. You can have metrics being sent to you, like through to an Excel spreadsheet, or through certain programs that will return that information. You can also do player surveys, although less people will do player surveys. And you may unfortunately have only certain types of players doing surveys. So you have to have a caveat with that one. Version I played, all the characters sucked. I don't know which version you played. I said something like that for my game. Yeah, look into it, because there are tons of metric software and integrations that exist to various degrees of success.
The more gameplay options you have, the more combinations you have, the more it breaks up your game playing groups into smaller chunks of, these are the people who tend to use this combination, these are the people who use this combination. And some of those combinations require more testing than others, even though they're not.
Oh, after the vamp. Okay, so that was after Crimson Court. Yeah, I did not work on Crimson Court at all. I did not like some of the decisions that came after that, personally. Probably because I didn't work on them. That's probably some of it, right? But I think that they kind of ruined some of the game after that. Different topic, different day.
Used more by other people. That will drive any of the production people on your development staff crazy. I've driven a number of production people literally insane. So take my word on that. Okay, the second biggest argument, or the second most frequent argument I hear against having lots of gameplay options, is players react badly to having lots of choices. This is the one that surprised me the most. This is the one that I had to read the comments and push them into my brain.
Okay.
Some people out there said they literally get choice paralysis, that they open up gameplay options. Maybe they're like, oh, I'm just going to change my inventory to, by default, sort by weight. And they open up the gameplay options, and there are 10 pages of options with 20 options on each one. And some of them are sliders and some are numerical values. And they're just like, ugh. And they have choice paralysis.
Okay, number one, I get that. I 100% understand that. I'm trying to think of how I want to... I've played games. I've played games like that. And I don't think I hated the game because it had options. I think I definitely got choice paralysis. And I was like, I don't know what I should change without ruining the game. So I often just wouldn't change anything. I would just be like, okay, I'm just going to experience what the default game is like. Kind of get it, but I think it's more like I can't find what I want. Yeah, I think to me also, I was thinking like, okay, but this is also an organization problem. If you have those settings, for instance, maybe directly within, like let's say you have, where's paint? Let's make a quick inventory, right? Inventory screen. Item info, blah, 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 inventory. Okay, you guys get it. Let's say up here you have like a little cog, a little settings cog. Let's just use a star because I can kind of make that. You know, and you specifically only put inventory settings there. Maybe that can help break up the flow. Maybe that's bad UX, by the way. I'm not a UX designer, so just take this with a grain of salt. But maybe there's an opportunity, if you have a lot of options, to put only context-sensitive options in an area where the player can change it contextually. Either way, I think that this is a problem of, if you open the options screen and you see a whole bunch of options, there are probably better ways to display those options that wouldn't give the players choice paralysis. Need characters start out as cannon fodder compared to key enemies so that you have to grind to bring them through veterans, see barriers. Before you learn that you are in the research stage, it's how the small amount of levels are used without making the game very short. If you don't research well, the game can become intensely long and repetitive. Yeah, one of my biggest criticisms of Darkest Dungeon is that the game is just too long. The gameplay variety does not support the gameplay length, and therefore the game feels like a grind because you're doing the same things and not having very many differences. Hey, Rush Floppy. Scenario, I open settings, I see a shit ton of options, I get overwhelmed. Fuck this, Alt F4. So does that happen to you? Do you have any examples, Rust Floppy, of a game where you've done that? Just out of curiosity. Also, I'm curious what your guys' take on that is. One sec. Maybe I can pull up an example too of what I did for Train Life. How to? Oh, it's a new start. Maybe. Oh, hold on, I'm gonna look at this YouTuber. So this is our main menu. Which, by the way, like I've mentioned, I love 3D main menus. So we added a 3D main menu in this. I love it. I will always make a 3D main menu. I think because I just think they are so enjoyable. Does he actually go through the gameplay options here? Oh, yeah, okay. So you can see here we created presets on the left. And like default, easy, hard, extreme, exploration, sandbox, and custom. So we had categories of options. And we also had an explanation of what that did. So you can see yellow light speed reduction. It's supposed to update. Maybe this was a bug when this came out. Oh no, it says infinite cache, unlock everything, no laws, train supremacy, and you can adjust all these settings there. If you guys saw this when you were when you start the game, you don't see this, right? You just see career options default, and you can set customize. I'm curious if something like this is what would make you guys say like, I don't know what to do. So I'm just gonna, quit the game. Grindy as hell. Also, even though you can force a low-level character into a high-level dungeon, you can't force a high-level character into a low-level dungeon. I did add a mod for that. That is one of the most popular mods, was my mod for that. Open settings, first thing I see is gameplay with 70 plus options. Yeah. I mean, did it force you? Well, you said you opened up settings and it showed that. Make menu unlockable. What do you mean by that, Casper? Bankruptcy threshold -0. That was bugged at the time. I remember that bug. Like when you make train delivery. You can change the settings, but not before. Yeah, I think there's a way that you can like let the player experience what the default is first, and then ask the player if they want to change. Yeah, there's reason for that. Follow my scenario. Okay. Yeah, I guess I don't know. I don't know if this was too many for players. I hope that this was kind of reasonable, but we did have some bugs I can see here. This must have been early on with one of them, and it wasn't showing the text that I wrote for these. Oopsies. I hope we fix that at some point. Oh yeah, see they're bumping up all the progression multiplier, city bonus duration. I think that's smart. That gets rid of so much grind in the game. But I made presets, right? Like default, easy, hard, extreme exploration. I hope that that did well. I didn't have anybody complaining about this. I had people saying that it was nice for them. So hopefully it was good. I don't know. I think this is too busy with the bridge in the background and the options and bars. That could be. That's more of a UI. That's more of a UI design issue, though.
And others will go in to make changes, and not realize that something they did made the game a lot harder because they forget that they changed one of the sliders from normal to medium or whatever. I mean, it maybe that the option doesn't really convey what it does very well, or worse,
UI is daunting.
they may
Yeah,
blame
I
the
agree
game
with you,
for being
military.
too hard to play without realizing that one of those, like slider 57 on page 3, would have made that game, would have gotten rid of that friction point altogether for them. But they didn't know because there were just so many things to look at. They're like, I can't find this.
It's very simple. Most players that play your game will play on the default settings. Take the time, make the default settings good. If you want to allow players to customize that further, you do a good job of explaining what that option changes and how increasing or decreasing it will make the game feel. That's as simple as you can be. If we have like a increase in money gained from quests multiplier, I think it's fairly obvious what that does, but you can still explain to players, hey, this is going to mean that you get more money, which means you can purchase things sooner, and it may impact progression. Like by increasing it, you might have an easier time getting things, but that your progression might be impacted negatively because you will have things at an earlier part of the game than you're supposed to have. And the default experience is catered, and this is kind of affecting it in a bad way, right? Make ChatGPT play the game and explain how he feels. Can ChatGPT feel?
And then there was funny. People will use options that they hate. They hate that that option is there, and they hate the setting they put it on, but they do it anyway. And then they blame the game. The two that I saw in there was some people mentioned that if a game has a save anywhere option, you can save anywhere. You can save in the middle of combat. You can save when you're away from people.
Oh, and so they save scum, but then they I do this. I honestly do this. But then they complain that I think this is what he's saying.
You can save anywhere you want.
Yeah.
They will then save scum.
Yep.
Even if that results in making the game less challenging, they will do it and then be upset with the game.
I do it, but I don't blame the game. I still think that, especially in certain games, there's some bullshit. Like for me, Baldur's Gate 3, I think there were some bullshit rolls that you had to pass in order to get a halfway decent outcome in some cases. I understand. Just play the game, let the rolls be what they are. But sometimes I only want to play a game once, and I want the ending that I want. I get that it's my choice, that I'm choosing to save scum, but I'm not blaming the game for making it too easy. I just think that there were a couple times where there were bullshit rolls that without save scumming, I would not have been happy with the outcome in any way, unless I like crit rolled or something. Off topic, for an older version of my CRT effect shader, and there was an option to have random chromatic aberrations. Random I fucking hate chromatic aberration. People sat too close to their TV, they've been altered.
Fine. They don't have to save scum. They don't have to do that.
Yeah.
But they will if the game lets them.
Yep.
And they're blaming.
I love to save scum too.
And then the other side of that is there are people who said they will always turn on quest markers if the game lets them. Even if they prefer to have them off. And even if the game is fully playable and fun with them off, they won't. They'll turn them on just because the option is there, and they will be mad at the game for for having that.
Or like hand
I
holding.
don't know how to fix that.
I don't think you can fix
You
that.
can't really address that in those people. It's what they like.
Yes.
You can't really argue with what people like. The only option is let's not give options for that. So, and then the third thing that I've heard frequently, and this is from other devs, maybe even ones that were on my team,
Okay.
they don't like having all those options. And many of them express the reasons I've already given, but a couple more is, one, they have to make all those options. They have to code and do user interface and then test all those options. You just made their work a lot harder.
It's true.
And this is like in addition to making the game. The other thing I've heard devs say is
it's true, but just do it, know what you want at an early phase so that when they're developing those systems, they expect that there will be a gameplay option that will address that. I think that's really what you can do to help ease your coders' pain on that, because I agree with what he's saying. Just design your gameplay options relatively early, or tell coders that, hey, we might have difficulty options for this. So, try to create it in a way that is modular or that allows for that, Have people ask if my current CR2 will have chromatic aberrations. The first thing I turn off in games like that, chromatic aberration, depth of field, motion blur, off. Off. Gone. Poof. Thanks for not ruining my eyes. But if players want them, sure, they can turn them on, I guess. But for my games, I'm going to turn them off by default.
Would you just decide as the game director what game you want and then make that game?
Yes.
Several people have accused me of putting in lots of game options because I wasn't sure of what worked.
Yep,
and
I've had that before too. We said that at the start of this video, that there will be people that blame game designers for, they put those options in because they couldn't design a good game. It's like, what if I just wanted you to have an easier time or a harder time? Like, I know the first mod I made for Darkest Dungeon, which by the way was the first mod ever made for Darkest Dungeon, was a mod to make the game easier. And then my second mod, or I think it was my third mod technically. Either way, the mod that is still around today is a mod that makes the game more challenging. I liked providing options to players, and I had people that enjoyed one, I had people that enjoyed the other. I will say the mod that made the game more challenging was way more popular, though, ironically. However, the most popular mods to date are the mods that make the game a bit easier.
Rather than try it and test it and commit, I just push that off onto players saying, here's a bunch of game options, rock on. And then the other thing I've heard people say is, why are we making 2 or 3 or more games? Because some of the game options are so significant. They change the underlying game in such a major way.
That's fair.
That you're effectively making 2 or 3 or more games because they're wildly different. So those are things I've heard from other game developers, sometimes on the game I'm making. Anyway, so the point of this video is if you're making a game, please think about your game options, your gameplay options very, very closely before you commit to them. Having too many is just as bad as having too few.
Yeah, he's right.
I hope this helps.
He's right. And, know what the scope of each of them is, right? So if you, for instance, infinite money in Train Life was a very easy thing, right? It was just a Boolean that sets your money to max, and when you purchase something, it takes from this, but, it doesn't go anywhere, right? But it was also a difficult thing to implement properly, and it invalidated certain achievements, and we had to make sure that when that option was enabled, those achievements couldn't be earned. And that did put additional stress on the QA team, right? But we knew early on that we wanted these options because I felt that it was core to giving the players a sandbox and letting them play the way they wanted to play. And in the end, that assumption turned out to be right, that players really enjoyed this. They liked customizing. We can see in that video that player liked to customize and play I know some players who had more challenging careers and then ones where that was very easy. Some players who wanted it to be easy because they didn't have enough time to play. It turned out to be a good decision, but hey, it did cost something, and especially with things that seem easy, like infinite money, it's not so easy to implement. Are there any mods that let you heal in the hallway? Kind of. It was hard coded that you couldn't heal in Darkest Dungeon hallways, but for instance, in my mod, I had healing potions that could be used in the hallway. Right? Just consider having a button in the options that gives you all the achievements. I know that you can't do that for consoles. You can do that for Steam, probably. Maybe. But for consoles, you would not be allowed to do that. I don't think even for consoles I know for Sony for sure, you couldn't have any achievement that was given when the player started the game. So there was that. Quite strict they were with that. Either way, this was a lot of fun. Thank you guys for watching the gameplay options. I will end the YouTube video there. We can talk for a couple more minutes and then I will have to get going. But thanks for watching on YouTube. Bye bye. Bye bye, YouTube.